Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. On the evening of September 24th, 1905, Mary Sophia Money finished work near Clapham Junction in southwest London. Nothing about her departure seemed especially alarming. She bought some chocolate, spoke briefly about where she was going, and then disappeared into the city. A few hours later, her body was found inside a railway tunnel in Surrey. More than a century later, one question still hangs over the case. How did Mary get there? Mary worked as a bookkeeper for a dairy. It was steady, respectable employment, the kind of job built around ledgers, accounts, and familiar routines. On that Sunday evening, she left the premises and indicated that she was going to Victoria. There was no known public scene, no immediate cry for help, and no obvious reason for the people around her to believe she was in danger. At first, it was simply an ordinary departure, before continuing. It helps to picture the railway network Mary entered. London's stations were already crowded gateways, carrying passengers toward suburbs and towns beyond the capital. Trains were divided into separate compartments, often without connecting corridors. Once the doors closed, a passenger could be isolated with a stranger until the next stop. Privacy was common, so was anonymity, and on a dark evening, both could conceal what was happening only a few feet away. Mary was later reported to have bought chocolate before setting off. That small purchase became one of the final ordinary details attached to her movements. She apparently said she intended to travel toward Victoria, but the precise path she took afterward was never established with certainty. Somewhere between her workplace and Merstham Tunnel, her evening changed completely. The surviving evidence suggests she entered the railway system, but exactly when, where, and with whom remained disputed. At around 9:33 that night, a train left London Bridge on a route that passed through the Surrey railway line. Witnesses later described seeing a woman who resembled Mary traveling in a first-class compartment with a man. Their accounts would become central to the investigation, but eyewitness evidence is rarely as clean as it sounds in hindsight, especially when the witnesses did not yet know they were observing people connected to a possible crime. Some passengers recalled that the pair appeared uneasy. There were reports of movement inside the compartment and what looked like a struggle. From another carriage or a platform, though, brief gestures can be difficult to interpret. Was the woman resisting the man? Were they arguing? Had someone simply lost balance as the train moved? The witnesses could describe impressions, but they could not explain what those impressions meant. Still, the reports were disturbing enough to demand attention. A separate observer beside the line also reportedly noticed activity in a first-class compartment. Taken together, the statements suggested that a woman matching Mary's appearance may have been in distress aboard the 9:33 service, yet none of these witnesses knew her personally. Their identifications were based on resemblance and later descriptions. That left investigators with a compelling possibility rather than proof. Mary may have spent her final journey alone in a compartment with an unidentified man. Now here's where the timeline becomes especially important. The train continued south toward Redhill, passing through stations and stretches of dark countryside. Merstham Tunnel lay along that route. If the woman was Mary, and if the disturbance was connected to her death, then something happened before or during the passage through the tunnel. A closed compartment, the noise of the train, and the darkness outside would have given any attacker a brief but powerful shield. At Redhill, a man was seen leaving the compartment believed to have been occupied by the pair. He walked away and was never conclusively identified. That unknown passenger became the central shadow in the case. Who was he? Did he know Mary, or had they met only that evening? Was he involved in her death, or had witnesses linked an innocent traveler to the wrong compartment? Investigators never obtained the answer that could settle those questions. At approximately 10:55 that night, a railway sub-inspector discovered Mary's body inside Merstham Tunnel. The tunnel was a grim place to make such a discovery, enclosed, poorly lit, and dominated by the machinery of passing trains. Her body had been struck on the line, and the damage was severe. At that moment, however, railway personnel did not know who she was. There was no identification lying beside her to provide an immediate name. No purse was found with the body. No railway ticket was recovered beside her. There was also no identification that could quickly connect her to her home or workplace. Those absences mattered. A ticket might have shown where she boarded and what destination she had selected. A purse might have contained money, personal papers, or some clue about her movements. Instead, investigators began with an unidentified woman and a railway tunnel full of unanswered questions. The condition of the body initially suggested the obvious explanation. She had been hit by a train, but that was only the immediate physical cause of the most visible injuries. Closer examination raised a darker possibility. A scarf had been forced into Mary's throat. This was not easily explained by an accidental fall onto the tracks. It suggested that violence may already have occurred before the train struck her, and perhaps before she entered the tunnel at all. Several of Mary's injuries were also believed to have happened before contact with the train. That distinction was crucial. Railway injuries could obscure earlier wounds, making it difficult to separate what happened inside a compartment from what happened on the track. If she had been assaulted first, then the passing train may have destroyed evidence as well as caused fatal trauma. The scene could appear to be an accident while concealing the sequence that placed her in danger. So let's back up a second. An accidental fall could account for someone ending up on the railway line. It could not, by itself, comfortably explain a scarf lodged in the victim's throat, nor could it easily explain reports of a struggle with a man who later vanished. On the other hand, suspicion is not the same as proof. Investigators still needed to establish that the witnesses had seen Mary, that the man was involved, and that she had been deliberately thrown. Identification eventually connected the dead woman to Mary Sophia Money. Once her name was known, police could retrace at least part of her day. They learned of her departure from the dairy, the chocolate purchase, and her statement that she was going to Victoria. But those details led to another puzzle. Victoria was not London Bridge. If Mary boarded the suspected service from London Bridge, why had she changed her plans and what happened in between? There are several innocent possibilities. Mary may have spoken casually about Victoria and later chosen another route. She may have arranged to meet someone elsewhere. She could also have traveled across London before boarding a train south. But without a surviving ticket or a reliable sighting at the station, each possibility remains hypothetical. Her own account of the evening ended when she left work, and everyone else could offer only fragments observed from the outside. The unidentified man was described through witness recollections, but no description produced a confirmed name. In a city and railway system carrying enormous numbers of passengers, a general likeness was difficult to trace. Clothing could be changed, facial hair could be removed, a traveler could give no name at all. Unless someone recognized him and came forward, he could simply blend back into ordinary life. That appears to be exactly what happened, assuming the witnesses saw the relevant man. Police also faced a practical problem created by the compartments themselves. Unlike a modern open carriage, these spaces could become sealed rooms between stops. There might be passengers in adjacent compartments, yet the sound of wheels and steam could overwhelm cries or movement. A witness glimpsing through a window might see only a few seconds. By the time anyone understood that something was wrong, the train had moved on and the people involved had separated. Merstham tunnel added another layer of uncertainty. If Mary fell or was pushed from a moving carriage, investigators had to determine where it occurred and whether she survived the initial impact. Inside the tunnel, visibility was limited. The track environment was dangerous even before another train arrived. Physical evidence could be displaced or damaged, and railway operations could not preserve a scene with the precision expected in a modern forensic investigation. The scarf remained one of the case's most unsettling pieces of evidence. It suggested an attempt to silence, choke, or incapacitate Mary, although the exact purpose could not be proven. Its position made a purely accidental explanation harder to accept, but it did not identify who had placed it there. No piece of cloth can name an attacker. Without a clear chain of events, the scarf pointed toward human involvement while leaving the person responsible completely out of view. The missing belongings also invited competing interpretations. Perhaps Mary had been robbed. Perhaps her purse and ticket had fallen elsewhere along the line. Or perhaps someone deliberately removed them to delay identification and conceal her route. Each explanation would imply a different motive, yet there was no decisive evidence showing whether theft was the purpose of the encounter or merely part of an effort to hide what had happened after an assault. Money itself did not provide a straightforward motive. Investigators could not simply point to a recovered purse in another person's possession, nor could they rely on identification papers linking a suspect to Mary. The absence of objects created suspicion, but absence is difficult to prosecute. A missing ticket tells you that something is gone. It does not tell you who removed it, when it disappeared, or whether it was ever in Mary's possession on that particular journey. At the inquest, the central task was narrower than solving every mystery. The jury had to consider how Mary died based on the medical findings and available testimony. They concluded that her death resulted from injuries caused by a train. That finding addressed the fatal mechanism, but not the larger question. There was insufficient evidence to decide whether Mary had fallen from the carriage or had been thrown from it by another person. That distinction left the case suspended between accident and homicide. The evidence strongly encouraged suspicion, especially the scarf, the apparent earlier injuries, and the reports of a struggle. But the legal process could not fill missing spaces with assumptions. No witness said they clearly saw Mary being pushed. No one identified the man beyond doubt. No recovered object tied him to the death. The inquest therefore stopped short of declaring exactly how she reached the tracks. It can be tempting, looking back, to arrange the fragments into a complete story. Mary meets a man, boards the train, struggles inside the compartment, and is thrown into the tunnel before he leaves at Redhill. That sequence is plausible. It may even be the explanation that best fits the surviving clues. But one word matters here: plausible. The historical record does not allow us to present that reconstruction as an established fact. There are other uncertainties too. Did every witness observe the same compartment? Did the woman they saw truly resemble Mary, or did later newspaper coverage shape their memories? Was the apparent struggle an assault, or did its meaning become darker only after the body was found? None of this makes the witnesses dishonest. Memory is simply vulnerable to distance, darkness, stress, and suggestion, particularly when a brief observation suddenly becomes evidence in a major investigation. At the same time, dismissing the witness accounts entirely would ignore how closely they seem to align with the known route and timing. A woman resembling Mary was reportedly seen with a man. Disturbing movement was noticed. A man later left the suspected compartment. Mary was then found inside a tunnel along the line. The pieces do not prove the whole picture, but they form a pattern too specific to treat as meaningless coincidence. Mary's case also shows the limits of criminal investigation in the early 20th century. There was no closed-circuit footage from stations, no electronic travel record, and no instant database connecting police forces. Forensic methods were developing, but a train had already inflicted extensive damage. Investigators depended heavily on physical searches, public appeals, newspaper descriptions, and the memories of travelers who may not have realized the importance of what they saw until later. And then there is Mary herself. Unsolved cases can become dominated by a mysterious stranger or an unusual object until the victim seems to fade into the background. But Mary was not merely the woman in Merstham tunnel. She was a working bookkeeper who left a familiar workplace expecting, presumably, to continue her evening. Her last confirmed actions were small and human: finishing work, buying chocolate, and mentioning where she planned to go. The ordinary nature of those details makes the ending more haunting, not less. There was no clear dividing line visible to the people around her. One moment, Mary was moving through a routine Sunday evening. Within hours, railway workers were trying to identify her body. Somewhere in that narrow gap lies the missing encounter, decision, or act of violence that investigators could never reconstruct well enough to name a responsible person. The unknown man, if he was connected at all, left behind no confirmed identity. He may have been someone Mary trusted, someone she had only recently met, or simply a passenger misinterpreted by witnesses. The record does not let us choose confidently among those possibilities. What it does show is that police had a potential suspect-shaped absence, a person seen near the suspected victim in the suspected carriage who vanished before anyone understood his possible importance. Merstham Tunnel became more than the location where Mary was found. It was the point where separate uncertainties converged: the missing ticket, the absent purse, the scarf, the earlier injuries, the witness sightings, and the unidentified man at Redhill. Each detail seems to lead toward an answer, only to stop just short of one. Together they create a powerful circumstantial case that something happened aboard the train, but not enough to establish precisely what. The official conclusion remained carefully limited. Mary died from injuries caused by a train, but the evidence could not determine whether she fell or was thrown. That wording preserved the uncertainty rather than resolving it. It acknowledged what could be medically supported while refusing to make a finding that the testimony could not conclusively prove. For Mary's family, though, that restraint meant there would be no clear account of her final moments and no one held responsible. More than a century later, the scarf still sits at the center of the mystery. It is difficult to reconcile with a simple railway accident, yet it cannot tell us who attacked Mary or how she left the carriage. The witnesses bring us closer, but not close enough. The man at Redhill remains unnamed, and Mary Sophia Money's final journey ends where the investigation did, inside the darkness of Merstham Tunnel, between a suspected crime and an answer never found. If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.